Attorney General, one of your favorite phrases during this hearing and in many other hearings where I've heard you is ongoing criminal investigations. I also have heard you several times talk about best practices and proprieties. When you decided to recuse yourself, did you look at best practices? I think you admitted already that it would have been probably a better practice for you to put in writing, but there's already a statute, 28 U.S.C. Section 591, that requires to put in writing your reasons for recusal in certain circumstances. Frankly, I've read it a couple of times. I don't know if it applies to your situation right now, but don't you think it would have been the best practice for you to just put it in writing, especially when you're talking about an issue of such significance?
Well, as I said, as I've thought about it even during the course of this last couple of hours, that I think that I'm going to go back and actually think about whether or not there's some kind of policy that I should put in place. Examine how often it's happened, recusals have happened in writing as opposed to orally, and I think that the better practice, as I said, frankly, I think is that we probably ought to put them in.
And I think you should look at whether 28 U.S.C. 591, again, I don't know that it applies to you, but you should really look at whether that applies to you or not, or whether there's any other law that would have required you to.
There are two things I have on my to-do list here.
Okay. The second thing I want to talk about is we already discussed the targeting by the IRS, admitting that they targeted conservative groups. Will you state today under oath that the Department of Justice, under your watch, has not targeted conservative groups for prosecution for political reasons or to gain political advantage?
It's not to my knowledge. I have no knowledge that that has ever occurred.
Do you know if the IRS leaked tax information related to Mitt Romney during the Republican presidential primary or general campaign?
I don't know.
And if you do not know, will you attempt to find out in your investigation?
I'm not sure that I'm not sure I have a predicate for that. I'll be honest with you, I don't remember that.
There were several claims during the campaign that there was personal information for Mitt Romney's tax records that were being leaked to the press, and I just want to know if the IRS was the one leaking that information. We also know that some of Mitt Romney's top donors were targeted by the IRS and the Labor Department, including a gentleman from Idaho. So if you could look at that as well, why it was that specifically people who were giving were some of Romney's top campaign donors that were actually immediately after they became public about how much money they had donated, that all of a sudden the IRS and the Labor Department was looking at them. And I have an important question. We've heard about numerous groups that were targeted that were conservative groups. Can you tell me whether Obama for America, Organizing for America, Occupy Wall Street, or any other progressive group has been targeted in the last 3 to 4 years by the IRS?
Well, we're at the beginning of the investigation, so I don't know what of any groups were targeted. All I know is what I've read about in the press. I'm not in a position to say, on the basis of the beginning stages of this investigation, which groups might have been inappropriately looked at.
Can you find out if it was only conservative? Because I think this is important. I think it's rather strange that it's only one group, a political group, but not the other kind of political group. Can you find out for our committee whether that?
Oh, I mean, the investigation would be designed to find out which groups were looked at, make sure that if they were looked at, it was done on an appropriate basis. If it was inappropriate, then to hold people accountable. And that will be done regardless of whether or not they are conservative or liberal, Republican-leaning, or Democratic-leaning.
And if you find out that they were only conservative, can you find out why it was that only conservative groups were targeted?
Yeah,
now, as you were, I'm going to read to you a quote that you stated about your contempt of Congress from last year. In February of this year, you said, "I have to tell you that for me to really be affected by what happened, meaning the contempt of Congress, I have to have respect for the people who voted in that way. And I didn't, so it didn't have that huge impact on me." Don't you think that quote shows contempt for the Republican members of Congress that are here that voted for this? And there were actually some Democratic members of Congress who also voted for contempt.
Well, I have to say that the process that we went through, or that you all went through, in making that contempt determination seemed inconsistent with both prior practice and also inconsistent with, or not taking into account, the good faith attempts that we were making to try to share the information that was sought. And I also thought that it was telling that when the NRA decided to score that vote, what was the NRA? What was the involvement of the NRA in that vote at all? It seemed to me then that this was something that was not about me, not about, well, it was about me, but it was not about, it was about things beyond just the exchange of documents. It was an attempt by certain people to get at this Attorney General. And that's why I said that with regard to that process, I simply didn't and don't have respect for it.
But you say you didn't have respect for the people who voted, and I think that same contempt may have led also to people in this administration thinking that they can go after conservatives and conservative groups. Thank you. I yield back.
I'm not the cause of people in the IRS doing things that might have been illegal. I will not take that.
No, I'm not accusing you of that. I'm just saying that maybe that same statement emboldened people to think that they could also go after other conservative groups. Thank you very much.